So welcome, welcome. If you are looking to leave teaching for writing, you have made it to the right place. This is a special webinar just for teachers from the B2B Writing Institute. And I'm Sarah Griesenbach, founder of the B2B Writing Institute. And the quote I wanted to pull for today, this is actually a really personal quote for me, because I used a Sharpie and wrote it on my leg when I was in the classroom because I just felt so overwhelmed by what was happening in my experience as a teacher. But this is from Marcus Aurelius. And he says, because your own strength is unequal to the task, do not assume that it's beyond the powers of man. But if anything was within the powers and province of man, believe that it is within your own compass also. And I just took from this that at the time, I was trying to make the classroom work for me. And I was like, there are people who have done this for years and years. It's possible to have a positive impact in the classroom. If they can do it, I'm a person just like them. I can do this too. And that really kept me going for the 2.5 years that I was there. But it turns out this also works for freelancing and for writing as a career, as a full-time job, because you're going to find that there are some things that you can't do. But when you look around, if anyone is doing it, there's really no reason you can't. There's no reason you can't try, and that the ability to learn these skills isn't within your wheelhouse. And I think that's a quote we can take with us forever. So in this 90-minute talk, I'm hoping to just give you a sense of what freelance writing is like, why teachers often make excellent B2B writers and freelance writers in general, and then just 3 simple things, extremely free things you can do to keep walking around and seeing if this could be a good path for you. And then I left a lot of time for Q&A for just anything that might come to mind. So I wanted to start with, before I got into me or what my journey's been like getting out of teaching, a day in the life for me as a successful, powerful freelance writer. It started when I woke up and argued with my husband about who got to shower first. And then the kids, once they got out of the room, they just broke free like monkeys and just broke things and got into the food. And it looked a lot like this photo from Cheaper by the Dozen. I made a smoothie. I didn't have enough almond milk, so I didn't get to make a coffee until I drove to the office to get this. Then I fought my way to the upstairs office and I put on some noise canceling headphones. I scanned my inbox. I checked my capacity planner, which is something I used to plan my writing workload. I checked that for the day to see what I needed to do. Then I pulled up a Google Doc and I started writing. And I think what I want to convey with this story is the first thing to know about writing is that it's just not a fantasy. It's not a fantasy job, like dream job. You're not getting away with something and escaping into the wild yonder when you set up a writing business and you find clients. You're working hard and you're doing stuff. You're just doing it in a different way than you did in the classroom. And so what we talk about today is going to be more about the reality of writing, not that fantasy of pull up at the beach with your laptop and all of your dreams come true. Because in 10 years of doing this, I don't know anybody who actually works at the beach who's happy doing that. And if you see a photo of an influencer at a beach, you're just a week away from them posting about how burnt out and lonely they felt while they were at the beach. So I'm just not buying that anymore. But the good news is that it's a great job that we can have. So my career, it's brought me frustrations. I've cried. There's challenges. There's scary parts. But it also has given me this freedom. And we bought a townhouse. And I brought my husband home to stay and be a stay-at-home parent. So it's just a different career path. And I mean that in a way that anyone can do this. I've seen people under 30 right out of college use some of our resources and get a full-time job in an agency as a writer. I've seen people over 60 train for this as a second or third career and get a full-time job in B2B and do this freelance. Moms, dads, single people traveling the world, you name it. If you can learn something new, and I think we all can, you can learn what you need to be a writer if it's the right path for you. So about me, how did I get here? I made it 2.5 years in the classroom. So I was a 9th grade English teacher and I just crashed and burned. I was a workaholic. Now looking back, I can really see those behaviors. And the classroom just gobbled up everything I was willing to offer. So my health, my energy, I was very sad. While I was there, I was doing a couple $15 content mill articles online and getting paid through content agencies, that kind of stuff. But then when I left, I pieced out for Christmas break and then didn't come back, which was wonderful, even though I was sad at the time. I got a job in government contracting, just using my English degree. Then I launched the website Life After Teaching to document my experience of leaving teaching and help other teachers leave teaching. So this goes back quite a while. So that was probably 10 years ago. Around that time, I used that experience. That was my first time learning what the internet is, how websites work, why people pay for content, why it's important. And I used that to get a job in marketing. And then I got laid off like right away, 6 months in. So as it turns out, very little about my career has been intentional, but I'm really grateful that all of this sequence of events happens. Because when I was laid off, I decided to see if I could sell my writing the way my boss had been doing, and I could. And then I haven't had to look back from that. The first year, I was able to ramp up into almost like an equivalent teaching salary, about 35,000. Then when I got those systems in place, I really refined who I worked for and how I did work. I hit 89,000, then 160. I came back from a maternity leave and doubled. And then, it's just been up from there. So I'm on my third year of maybe over 200K from just writing. And I'm not going to say that is common or easy, but it is possible. Like we're here talking about it. None of this was a fantasy. I was writing white papers, articles, case studies, webinars, probably overworking. That's a big part of my story is getting obsessed with work and using it to escape any problems that I have. But as I find that balance, it's been so nice to return to almost returning to earth and realizing that I have this flexible career if I just choose to use the flexibility. So there's pros and cons. Some of the pros that you might already know, being a writer feels really cool to say. Some of us, that's been a lifelong aspiration. Having more control over your income, knowing I can lean in and solve some financial problems has been really nice over the years. And having more control over my time, knowing I can literally turn my phone off. I just had this realization the other day, but I can turn my phone off and it just truly doesn't matter as long as my family can reach me. And it's really nice. The cons are what keep people from diving into freelancing, at least not knowing where to get clients, like ding, ding. The financial risk if you can't find clients, like on the timeline that you need. The stress of being self-employed, benefits, being sick, vacation, retirement, all those things. And then the cons of being an in-house writer, like the risk of burnout if people are expecting you to do too much. And of course, being laid off, like we're seeing all these layoffs in the tech space right now. So I can't tell you which path is going to be right for you or even if writing is the thing. But today I want to talk about just the current landscape of writing, how freelancing works and why it's actually a really stable career and what that might look like for you. So the current writing landscape, sometimes when I'm talking to people, I get a little too excited and I jump into the nuances of B2B and like this kind of marketing world that's behind the scenes without accounting for the fact that sometimes writing is the new thing. So I wanted to start with just what freelance writing is. And we're going to put a pin on the term B2B or business to business. It's just a specific kind of marketing writing that ends up paying really well and that teachers have a lot of great skills for. Yeah. If you had told me 10 years ago that I get to write for a living, I wouldn't have really understood like the words coming out of your mouth. Because in my mind, it was just published authors and teachers. And those were like my career paths. Those are my options. And I certainly didn't have a story finished if I wasn't having people knocking down my door to get a story finished. So it was just teaching. But in reality, writing is a thing that people do. This is just an entire industry that is there that we just don't know about because of how we've been raised or whatever professional experiences we've had. And it's always going to be in demand. So just imagine like Hemingway back in the day, 122 years ago, he was a freelance writer. Like he would get paid for assignments by the mail. He would get the check and then go into the mountains and ski for a little bit. Like this has been going on. This is established things. And it might sound really arrogant or presumptuous to say will always be in demand, but this is how I'm looking at the business world. There will always be businesses providing services. That is how our culture is set up. Certainly in a capitalistic society, you're going to have businesses providing value. But in order to provide that service or those values, they have to sell what they're doing with words. And if they need words, they need people like us. That's how it works. So the only thing missing for you to tap into that is going to be knowledge about how to do it. So the actual writing skills, and then knowledge about where clients are. So I have this graphic. There's one of these for every industry you could imagine, but this is just all of the companies just in healthcare technology, like even a very special niche of healthcare technology. And this is more of a B2B example, so I'm getting ahead of myself. But you can see there's just so many companies out there. This is just one small niche of one niche. And so there's this times like 100 of opportunities to write and companies that need help with their advertising. And I just think that's a beautiful thing. So in super basic terms, freelancing just means you don't have an employer. You're out on your own and you find business people who need help with writing. Then you offer your services to them, they hire you, and hopefully rehire you. Your income comes from those fees, and ideally a savings account that you've saved up so you can just give yourself a paycheck like an employer would. So in an ideal world, for example, let's say you get $1,000 check for some writing work you've done over a month. You're putting about a quarter of that into an account for taxes, all your account. You're putting a quarter of that into an account for business expenses or savings, and then 500 into account for your next paycheck. And then each month you're having that money pool up so that you're actually dispersing a paycheck to yourself each month. It took me like 5 years to read Profit First. That's a great book recommendation. If you are already in the freelancing space and money is a bugaboo, you want to do Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. And it's just a very simple read about having separate bank accounts so that you can disperse money as it comes in and save for the future on autopilot. It's a really wonderful book. But anyway, it took me about 5 years to really realize I needed to pay myself like a regular employer. And once I did that, like the first year that we scrimped and I actually stopped buying things for a little bit and we got $10,000 in the bank account. And then I could just write my paycheck twice a month, much like teaching, or once a month, if that's the payment schedule you're used to. It was just so much freedom in that. And it allowed me to pick clients and make choices about my time a lot more differently. So the different kinds of writing. When we think of writing for businesses, most of us are thinking of Mad Men and advertising and probably whiskey. That's actually called B2C marketing or business to consumer marketing. That's the hey girl kind of stuff. But in B2B marketing or business to business marketing, that's all of the technology operating behind the scenes that allows those businesses to work. So it's the iceberg behind all of this stuff that we see on the surface. So B2B is the technology and the product that those businesses use to run their business. It almost sounds like a joke. But here are two examples. So in B2C, you're walking through the mall, there's an express store, and it says, "It's so cold out, girl. Buy this sweater, look super hot at brunch with that cutie from the dog park." That's the kind of stuff you end up writing in B2C. If you're a B2C, please don't take offense. I just could never really get into that kind of writing. It didn't work for me. So I very quickly moved into B2B. In B2B, it's more like a conversation with the business owner or an executive in the business saying, "Hey, hiring in retail is really hard. Use this automated tool to make it easier so you can retain employees and sell more sweaters." You see that kind of shift? Like B2C is talking to the consumer, like you and me, trying to sell more of something or provide a service or all these great different things that are coming out. B2B is more like, "Hey, businesses, you need technology to do what you're doing. Let me help you buy all of that stuff." And there's a B2B side of absolutely everything. I have these examples here, but you're going to be surprised. Even in the classroom, you're surrounded by B2B tech because any technology you've used over the past few years, like smartboards, Blackboard, like LMS online, anything to do with classroom management online, all of those companies have a B2B angle. And they got into your classroom by writing white papers and doing marketing in this way that helps districts find out about the products and then purchase those products. So both B2C and B2B companies hire full-time and freelance for writing work, which is surprising, but it just depends on the marketing manager and the company and how they're set up, whether they want one person to do a lot of writing work or they want a lot of different people to accomplish the work. So that's why part of that conversation is you're just saying, "Hey, do you ever hire freelancers? Do you need freelancers on your team?" And then you can be one of those people. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. So when it comes to the subject matter of B2B, I have a link here. This is the intro. Excuse me. This is the open house where we just talk about what B2B is. And that could be a good resource if you end up being interested in this. So the teacher to writer pipeline, and we have a Q&A question that's going to be more specific about the difference between B2B and B2C. So we'll be able to talk about that. But let's talk about you. I think teachers make great writers, and especially B2B writers, because we have these three traits. So explanation skills, organization skills, and curiosity. And it really is that simple because any marketing manager, the person who's hiring for these roles, is going to be really lucky to have you pop up in your inbox because your standards of professional behavior or your ability to help is just miles away from what they might be dealing with. So everything else besides these three things, you can just learn on Google or a program like mine or a program like many that you'll find online, whoever you resonate with. But let me talk about these traits a little bit more. So the fantastic teacher trait, number one, your explanation skills are just out of this world. Reading is learning. Writing is teaching. And that really is as simple as it gets for me. The very first time I wrote an article, it just felt like, oh, this is a lesson plan that will be spoken, and it's just very short, right? Like we're teaching through writing, especially when you're writing long form, which is more common in B2B. You're thinking through the process of understanding new information. You're giving someone else a reading and understanding experience. So asking good questions, introducing things effectively, using relevant examples. Does all of this sound familiar? I hope from like any lesson that we've done. Creating a progression of ideas or logic, being willing to hear and understand feedback and then apply it and track that process. All of that is just essential. And an example would be like when I sit down to write an article, like this is an actual prompt that I got to write like a 2,000 or 3,000 word white paper on. I don't start out knowing anything in this sentence. Like I do, but I had to Google a lot of it. How payers can successfully increase automation in the provider contracting lifecycle. That is mysterious to me. But once I started doing research, once I read the company's other materials, I knew I could teach myself what that was, break it into its parts, and then explain it to someone else within a reasonable time period. And that's really what's happening in B2B, especially. One of the nuances there might be if you go into conversion rate optimization or website copywriting. That's a little different because you are learning those mechanics of sales and the order that things should come in and all that stuff. But my example is more for content marketing, which is that longer form stuff. As it turns out, this sentence just means that when our insurance company, like Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, they're the payer, when they make a contract with a doctor or a hospital, which is the provider, there's a lot that can go wrong in that arrangement. So automating that, introducing technology with that, helping people see pricing, all of that really helps the business process. And that's like a whole side of the world I am completely new to, and it's fun to explore. So the skills you're adding to this is just what is B2B marketing? What is a white paper? How do you format that? What do people expect when you turn one in? And that's stuff that you can learn. Fantastic teacher trait number two, organization. So especially in the world of standardized tests and IEPs, we tend to be natural organizers or process followers, at least. Like we understand going through something in sequence and making sure all the steps are taken. So the ability to enter a situation and take the lead like that is the project management process. And that is the editorial process with writing. So keeping track of the things that need to be done, just like you do with lesson planning, school schedules, student needs. If you're more like the absent-minded professor, B2B is going to be a struggle. It's going to be really stressful because at least 40% of your job is just organizing things and being in the right place at the right time. So if you schedule calls and you're taking an interview for a project, if you're creating an outline for something, you need to be able to reference like the notes from a certain call, that kind of stuff. Whether you freelance or go in-house, you have to keep track of those moving parts. Deadlines, invoices, specific style guides for a given client. If you have 3 or 4 clients, and they all use commas in different ways, you're keeping track of that. New clients, networking, all these different things. There's just a lot to organize. Fantastic teacher trait number 3, it comes up with that health plan thing, right? Because somebody here really perked up at that and was curious, like, what are payers and providers and like why I didn't know this was happening? I want to know more. And some people actually literally fell asleep and you're just waking up now. So it starts with curiosity, like what you actually are curious about and what you get energized when you learn about something. So if you don't get excited by learning how things work, if you don't super care how businesses work, maybe not a great field for you. Every week or month, you're going to be meeting new people, you're absorbing new ideas, and seeing those connections and exploring them within writing is just a fundamental part of the job. And I actually think curiosity ends up being the source of your power as a writer because you don't have to be the authority on something. If anything, you're just translating the authority's expertise into something that's readable and easy to look at. You bringing that curiosity to the table and asking, how does that work? Or that's confusing. Can you tell me more about that? Kind of being brave enough to ask those questions is what makes us really good at our job, which is super cool. So when you're curious, you end up thinking, how does that work? That's like your first instinct. And when you're not curious, you might be feeling more like, that sounds so confusing. I could never figure that out. And I don't really want to. And like I said, when you're with an expert or when you're with a client, What you're doing is serving as the translator between someone with a lot of expertise and a potential customer, person just like you or me with some business experience. So sometimes it actually ends up being better if you don't know everything about it, because then you're writing from the perspective of the person who's going to read it. So you're translating this complex information into simple, complex concepts and helping them understand how their product or service is being viewed by the world. And I had that call yesterday about the payers and the providers, and I was able to actually ask the question, what you've explained sounds perfectly reasonable to me. When people hear that, why don't they buy it? What are some of those obstacles that come up that make them not listen to what you're saying? And that led to just great content and great information coming out. So our 3 quick steps. So if this is intriguing, you think there could be something here, 3 things, 3 free things. Here's how I would start over if I was just dropping into writing economy and trying to figure this out. I would very much start with my free class. I think we all know that's where I was heading. But this just is, what is B2B marketing? What is a white paper? And what are some examples? Like, how can I see what all this looks like? And it's all text with some video, and it's great. And that's going to tell you, when I read a white paper, do I fall asleep? First, see a doctor, because you might have sleep apnea. But if it actually bores you and it's just, there's no way in the world I would ever want to write something like this, that is great information to know before you try to get a client and try to make this happen. So I'd start there. Next, this one's the one that is a little interesting and new. You're going to subscribe to interesting things in B2B. I like to recommend free emails from Industry Dive to get a sense of how people are talking about the industry. And then you're just asking yourself, does anything strike my interest? Do I want to know more about anything? For educators, niches like educational technology in K through 12 and higher ed can be really nice and feel really comfortable because you already know a lot of the basic language and a lot of what people care about in that space. As humans, I also like to recommend retail and grocery, just because we are consumers. Sometimes we can have some insights into what consumer technology is doing. And then this is going to surprise us, but I found teachers also thrive in technical spaces like healthcare and construction, because when things are highly specialized, people assume the writer won't have specialized knowledge. If you go and write a construction project, they're not going to assume that you are like a bowling pin operator or whatever it is you're writing about, because they're just not that lucky. So it's almost like they understand you're just learning about the topic and you'll be able to write about it. So let's check out that one. This is what it'll look like when you check it out. And Industry Dive is a company that just puts out really great content, almost like news, for people in these special niches. So we've got Banking Dive, all about banking, Biopharma, which is like drug development and FDA stuff. This hurts my brain. CFO Dive is for chief financial officers, IT, technology. You can see there's a Food Dive for like food manufacturing, beverages, food tech. Like, there's some really interesting stuff happening in your grocery store that we don't know about. I think that's just very cool. Higher Ed Dive, we'll check out this one. We'll check out K through 12 Dive, so we get a sense of it. So check it out. So this is what a B2B reader is looking at when they look at education products. Top stories, 5 best practices as schools brace for monkeypox. That's a healthcare / teaching thing. Governors commit to computer science, but accountability questions persist. I'm not interested in that. I'm not going to click on that. 4 ways transitioning to a 4-day school week impacts districts. Interesting. Students show significant progress as staffing woes continue. I'm not sure I believe that, but I haven't read it, so who knows? But you can see it's just this interesting angle on what's taking place at a higher level. So when we're teachers, we're really focused on student outcomes and what's happening and whether or not we're going to have rocks thrown at us, which was my experience. But when you come out into B2B, it's more like what's taking place in the school environment and how can technology help us work through this? Or should technology help us? That's an interesting question. Oh, check it out. Playbook over here. And I meant to draw attention to this on the right. Library resources. This is where you're going to find the longer content like white papers. Why your K through 12 teaching resources should include microlearning. Content from study.com. Here's what's happening here. And how cool is this? Study.com paid K through 12 Dive to help them make a white paper so that principals and administrators and everybody would read this and then contact them and work with them. So it really is, this is the B2B world's version of an ad. Fascinating. And this is the kind of thing that you would be able to write. So if you like it and you get into templates and stuff, you would talk about microlearning, You would tell people about the achievement gap. You'd talk about the benefits of microlearning, and you would talk about how to evaluate curriculum solutions. This is the ad part where it's basically a soft promotion. Cool. And somebody wrote, I've been looking for something like this recently. I love that. Yeah, I love Industry Dive. There's also one called Smart Brief, which is not about underpants, even though it should be. Smart Brief Insights. Let me put that in there as well. And this one is a little bit more leadership focused, but you're going to see stuff about social media marketing, consumer insights. This is all the stuff. And right now, like it's going to read like a different language. That's totally fair game. But what happens is as you read, maybe by the fifth article or the second white paper, you just start to have a sense, almost like language by immersion. You start to understand some of the deeper things that are happening because you're just a good reader. Restaurants Dive. So if you like to eat out, like probably going to be something interesting there. Smart cities. So supply chain, utility, waste, and smart cities can really appeal to people with interests in energy and climate and stuff. But there's a lot. And each one of these links represents just a whole functioning business with multiple articles coming out every day. Perfect. So what you can do is find one of those that you enjoy, you subscribe in your email, and then they'll just send you a daily recap of whatever's been posted, and you can pick and choose and see what you like. And then finally, maybe a little controversial, just create a LinkedIn profile or login and just start building your network. So before you decide you want to do this, before you set up a business or have a shingle to hang out, before you have a client, just refresh your LinkedIn. This could happen today. Sign in, make sure you have a decent profile photo, not like a selfie or like beer, weddings or anything. And make sure your data is up to date, even if it's just your teaching information. And then go find some people and just start connecting. So send out a couple connections each week. Find some people you don't know who look interesting and connect with them too. You can start with me. That's a link to my profile there. Because 6 months from now, LinkedIn could be a really helpful tool. And you will be surprised by how the people are loosely associated with other people that you might know and just how the marketing world comes together. And a lot of people can be hesitant to start to do stuff on LinkedIn. But I want to invite you to do that because anyone who's on LinkedIn right now, they're there because they want to meet people. So even if they don't accept every invitation that comes their way, if they didn't want to ever be approached, right? It's like, why are you out at the bar? If they didn't want to make connections and meet new people, they wouldn't have a profile. You wouldn't be able to click connect. So I just really encourage you to try that out. Just send a message like, hey, I'm learning about B2B. I'm learning about freelancing. I love your content. I'd love to connect. Something as simple as that can just start helping you build your network and just be exposed to more people in this space. Perfect. So that brings us to our close. I just want to be here for Q&A and any questions that come up. And sometimes what really struck me as I was reflecting on all of this, sometimes we have to knock our assumptions off the pedestal to see what's really going on in our dream career. Because writing, it has these amazing pros, but it is just a job with highs and lows like anything else. There's going to be ramp up time. There's education time. There's self-exploration to see, do I even like writing for a living? Like maybe writing is a private gift that I have and I do journaling and fiction and stuff. But it's just good to know that stuff because once you know it's for you, you can make that switch and feel really comfortable. So I've seen people do this all in, just diving in, quit the job, live on savings. Whew, that'd be stressful. Or sticking your foot in the waters, freelancing on the side. Both of those are going to have pros and cons too. It's up to you. It's going to work. So I wanted to leave plenty of time to ask stupid questions, like the stupidest question you can imagine, because we know there are no stupid questions. And if you're wondering something, I guarantee somebody else here is wondering that too, and would be really grateful if you asked, like maybe they're feeling shy. And in fact, I love this quote from Amy Posner, who's a writing coach. The more questions you ask, the smarter you look. Like I really have come to believe that. So I have one or two things that came in by email that I'd love to address, but if you have questions, please feel free to drop that in the chat. And the first one is anonymous, which was a great conversation by email last night. But it's called, Hey Girl. I've been in the freelance space. So the writer writes, I've been in the freelance space trying to launch my career, but I haven't found that thing yet that's both lucrative and I feel really passionate about, except case studies. I'm finding them hard to recruit for. I'm a former teacher, and I'd love to hear if you have suggestions for niches or clients that you'd recommend where the copy doesn't have to be all peppy and fake sounding. I'm not quite sure how to describe it. I've seen it a lot with coaches or people who are marketing courses, just a lot of, hey girl, kind of language. You know what I mean? And I totally know what you mean. It's just not really me. So I find it hard to write, but I'm not sure who to reach out to instead. I don't really know anything about tech, but they seem more serious and sometimes medical. I also don't want to sound like I'm making fun of coaches or anybody who uses that kind of language. It's not bad or silly. It's just more of a question of writing in a language that comes naturally to us. And just yes, I get that. I think we talked about a little bit when we were looking at the Hey Girl example for B2C copy, like business to consumers versus B2B. And I do see that in B2B, B2C, so many B's. In B2C, there's this push for human to human instead of business to consumer. So it's really about going overboard, trying to talk like how we assume people talk. And I do find personally it gets a little too much. So it gets a little too sassy, a little too random. And companies are just doing that because it works, I think. It's like making TikTok ads and stuff. And I think what's happening here, what I'd encourage you to do is to change where you're looking for work. Because if you're running into a lot of that kind of language, it might be a sign that it's not the right product or the right niche for you. I'm going to see that a lot in products geared towards younger people because you don't get an ad from AARP saying, "Hey girl," right? Not yet, at least. Maybe a couple of years for that. So start looking more into niches like the ones we've discussed, where it's a real business, it's an established business, right? They're not launching a new product and trying to get a lot of sales. Maybe they're not even launching a product at all. And maybe they're not trying to sell products because selling products is going to be very different from selling services and subscriptions and stuff. So I think it could be about where you're finding those clients. I did want to talk about it's not really me, so I find it hard to write. And I think that's interesting because there's a level of all of this where we have to learn a new style of writing. So I do think it's going to be normal if it feels uncomfortable to write in the style of a given client. Like I've had situations where I write what I think is my best, and then I get a lot of feedback from the client that makes it more corporate-y, and they wanted it to sound more formal and frankly more stiff. In some cases, I push back on that and I say, this makes no sense, or this is quite a stereotype. I wouldn't want to include that. Sometimes we just let the client write it how they want it because they are the ones who are going to go out into the world and have their brand represented by it. So I would say there is a way to avoid the hey girl kind of stuff that's just really floppy, but also we're going to need to make room for writing in different styles that might not be exactly how we want to write. One final suggestion, because it came to mind, a great exercise could be to look for companies whose marketing you really like you love the way they talk to you and you love the ads that you see, and then go find more companies like that. Because for every hey girl ad, that almost tells me more about where you're spending your time, right? On Facebook and TikTok, rather than where there's going to be different kinds of advertising to see. So that could be interesting. But thank you for your question. Cool. The only other one I had lined up was just the case study we have for Breton, who's a teacher in Nashville. I actually went to Nashville in May for the copywriter conference, something like that. And I got to meet Breton and we had a muffin together and it was really cool. But Breton pulled off the dream exit. So over the summer, he realized he really didn't want to go back. He leaned into B2B and accepted a full-time job in the fall before he had to go back. And so now he's successfully been doing that for a year and then recently took another job in marketing with a promotion. And it's just a great example that your skills as a teacher are suitable for other places. Like you have transferable skills, and anything you've done in the classroom, I truly believe it can be moved over to another field. So our question, so where do you find clients? I love it. I love it. Because if you just pull up a browser and it's clients, come to me, that's very intimidating. That's not going to work out well for many people. The challenge is there's a lot of nuance to finding clients. And then there's a lot of nuance to finding clients who are going to hire you. Just because you found them doesn't mean that you're going to hire them. So if I'm looking for tricks and stuff, if I even pretended to have tricks, one of my favorite things is g2.com, which is a software review site, which ends up being a lot of B2B because companies tend to use the most software. Oh, and I'll share a B2B, B2C example in just a second. But I love this place because you can enter a category of something you like to write about, and then it will populate several dozen companies that are in that space. So let's say we want to do learning management. And a learning management system is very much like Podia, where you signed up for my stuff. It allows you to have users who access content inside of it. And so companies will use that for training, for onboarding, for just anything to do with work. So if I search learning management system, I'm going to pull up 829 learning management systems. Whoa, that's a lot. That's a lot. So this could be a prospecting list where I go to their websites, I see if they have an active blog, and then I find their marketing manager on LinkedIn and say, hey, do you ever work with freelancers? It really can be that simple. But I said there's nuance because at that stage, you're going to want to have a writing website. You're going to want to have a clip, some kind of example of the writing you do. So that can get complicated. But as a general, like, where do you find clients? I do this. I also sometimes really big brand names will pop up in this and it doesn't feel very realistic. So I will actually sort it by most pop, boom, and then go to the very end of the list. This is so sad. But we want to find the least popular companies who might need help with their marketing. That's a terrible name. Don't tell them I said that though. All right, so we found EdQuire. This is interesting. So EdQuire empowers teachers getting the right data to the teacher. That's interesting. So we'd come up here to their blog and just check out, do they have resources? Are they posting regularly? It looks like not. It looks like they stopped posting about 2 years ago. Maybe they're still doing it. I don't know. But I could take that. I'm going to take that to LinkedIn. You can see it's going to be this process, like times 10 to get a couple emails out. And I'm just searching EdQuire, this website that I found. Nice. I see a product manager. I could try to connect with them, but I'm just going to go to their website. Oh, so we found 2 duds, but we can use this list as we go through. Maybe if we get closer to the middle, so there's a lot of inactive LMS companies, and find each of them and see who we might want to be able to work with and if we could write for them. Alternatively, that website we were just on, boom, companies over here that are sponsoring the playbooks, like you could go to study.com, see if they need writers, Overdrive, T-Mobile. T-Mobile is probably too big a brand name to contact directly, but you start to get the sense of where you can find these companies. Cool. And Dave says, did I put together the healthcare tech graphic or is it available somewhere? I did not. It is available somewhere if we search. And really, if you do any niche and then health and businesses, you're going to see a bunch of roundups like this. So there's one. This is a bigger one. I remember seeing one for B2B marketing that was just astonishingly big. I knew I should have linked the source. I knew somebody would check that. But thank you. Probably reverse image source it as well. But yeah, when you pull this up, yeah, here it is. So you can see people have made, like, companies of just gathering all of this. So if we were to do EduTech business image, boom. Nice. That's a much better example to grab. Let me swap that out. So I'm just taking a screenshot of this, dragging it. So things like Edpuzzle, Lambda, like you're going to find there's different nuances among all of these things. I'll add that later, but nice. So you can see, so educational tech companies is about an example of 100. There's learning environments and student support. It's a little hard to see. Language learning. So I've written for Grammarly. What's the other one? Rosetta Stone is one. Things like Quizlet. You could literally go and pitch Quizlet and talk about your experience with them in the classroom. That might be more of you as the subject matter expert, but once you learn the B2B marketing side of things, you could talk to them. Assessment and credentialing, learning content and resources. Like these are things that you have used or are familiar with from the classroom or educational experiences that when we step back and see them, like they're just companies that need help with marketing. And so that is a great example I wanted to share when we were about to search on G2. So there are companies that have both a B2B and a B2C side, and that's where it gets interesting with the Hey Girl stuff. So on the B2C side, let's say we're talking about Blackboard, the learning management software, which some of us might have used for community college or any educational experiences. Oh, an Anthology bought them. That's interesting. So Blackboard, learning management services, they have a B2C side, which is advertising to the students on campus saying, log into Blackboard, talk with your teacher, check your grades, register here, like that kind of stuff. That's a bit more B2C and more direct to the consumer. And then they have a B2B side where it's use this platform to manage all of your departments in one place, have more accurate data, and just make it easier for students to enroll and achieve all of those business outcomes and stuff like that. I think that's why B2B is so neat, because some companies, they might have a B2C side that you're not as interested in, but they are going to have a B2B side as well. And Grammarly is the same way. So Grammarly advertises to you and me, like, use this program, check your writing, become a better writer. But they also have a business side where they're selling to higher education institutions, like selling a big package to a college and selling to businesses. And so I've written for them on the business side, which ends up being really interesting. Let me think of what ends up being common. Finding clients is just very challenging. One nuance to think about with that is that the struggle of finding clients is very real, but it's almost like the experience of leaving college and trying to find a job. There's a frenzy, where you're trying to land those jobs and get those offers. But then once you have the jobs, they lead to more work. So many of my customers, my writing customers, I've had 5 or 6 years at this point. So it's almost like I'm not an employee, but we have had a working relationship for a really long time. And so once you do the work, you find you enjoy the work, you do a good job, you keep working with that client month to month. And so you can end up having, let's say, very early on, I might find a new client. I might agree to 6 blog posts at $100 each for the month, which is a lot of work for not a lot of money looking back, but it was very exciting to have that work coming in. I've just landed a $600 a month income. And so now I would build on that and just keep getting more clients, then replace lower paying clients with higher paying clients. The thing that we might not see when we're asking where do we find clients is just that once we have the client, the view is going to be very different. You're going to understand how you work better. You're going to understand who needs you more. You're going to understand who you'd rather work with. Some people really don't like being on phone calls. Some people prefer to be on phone calls a lot. So you're going to be looking for clients with different traits and stuff like that. And the answer always surprises you because it's more once you take the first step, then you can see the second step and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to think if it's possible to really just step in to a 6-figure writing job. And I'm not sure because you have to go from 0 to 100K. Like you have to walk all of those steps. Whereas maybe that's what makes getting a job so easy because it feels like you just land that one job and you land that paycheck. But as we know, that comes with some risks. Yeah, so when I look at clients, so I have probably my longest client is Industry Dive, and that's been 5 or 6 years. And I have probably been with them longer than many of the people they have on staff now because they've had so much turnover, like with their project managers and stuff, which ends up being really interesting. So about half my work probably comes from that agency situation where they're assigning work to me as a publication would assign work. They send me a project in the inbox and I say yes or no, I can take this on. And then the other 30% is probably directly with clients. So I went and found companies where I had writer friends refer me for work once they land a new client. And then I work with them on a monthly retainer. So I have one for 3,500, another for 3,700, like that kind of thing. And those things fall into place. So somebody says, how are you usually paid? PayPal, automatic deposit. When it started, it was definitely checks in the mail, which was very frustrating. Now it's almost all automatic deposit, ACH. Let me show you that. So I have a software. So FreshBooks is the one I use. There's a lot of wonderful software. So really anyone that resonates with you is going to be a great option. But I sign in here, I create an invoice, I send the invoice according to our terms, then they pay the invoice. Sometimes that is net 30, which means I do the work and then I get paid 30 days later. That's very tough to handle with cash flow. This is getting really complicated, so I don't want to overwhelm anybody. But there are ways to either negotiate those terms or, like I said, you save up your 10K so that you're getting paid regularly for like 2 or 3 months, and then the money just accumulates as you land client work. So I think that's the revelation I've had this year is it's not so much about landing a gig and getting paid, land and get paid. It's more about the flow of work of just each week, I'm doing 30 hours of writing work. And over the next few months, I'll get paid for it. So I have invoices coming in as deposits. I have invoices coming in as final payments, but that average ends up working out in my favor. So I think that's why it can be different if you do writing in-house and you just have that paycheck situation. There's a lot of benefits to that, literally. But then if you go freelance, you can end up setting up like a rhythm of payment that ends up being a lot higher. But there's stress that comes with that as well. I just don't want to paint anything as the perfect solution. There are just benefits and cons, pros and cons. And how I'm paid often the writer can set the terms on that and say, I accept payment by check or PayPal. I accept credit card, that kind of thing. And it's up to you if you take credit card. Early on, those fees felt too overwhelming, but now I really enjoy the cash flow and people are faster to pay when they can use credit cards. So I'll accept that credit card fee sometimes. Ooh, retainers. I want to be honest, I have not really made a retainer work for me the way I've heard other people make them work for them. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert on retainers. I feel like there are some good blog posts about that if you Google them. The challenge with retainers is usually it's about expertise and having access to you. And when you're first starting out, you may not have that expertise. So it ends up being about your time and the blogging. And so I find people who get writers just to have a writer on retainer, they may end up abusing your time or getting too much out of it. Versus when you're further on in your career, if the retainer really is just about you and working with you, then it can be a lot more fruitful for you. So I have a retainer of $3,500 a month. It covers like 4 or 5 phone calls and then 2 or 3 big content projects. But I am only doing that because I really trust the person that I'm working with. And I worked with him 5 years ago on different things. And so I can't say that I would just accept a retainer coming into my inbox because you end up tying yourself to someone who could have some red flags if you don't want to work with them. Another way I've seen retainers happen is it really is more about agreeing to a regular body of work. Like we call it a retainer, but if it's just one white paper per month, is it really a retainer? I don't know. It gets metacognitive at that point. Yeah, because I could call it a retainer, but what I really have is just a working agreement where I'm going to do 2 blog posts and a white paper each month for a client. And so like technically, is that a retainer? I don't know. Because to me, retainer would mean you have 10 hours and if you use it or don't, that's your business. And I've never found that to work for me. But other people have, so I wouldn't want to discourage you from doing it. And how much do you decide to charge is another question coming through. And again, just a lot of nuance there because when you're starting out, the first time I got paid $15 to write or $25 to write, like I celebrate it. It really is amazing to write and be compensated for that, especially on the side, like a side hustle. It just feels like free money. So the perspective of doing this as a side hustle and pricing, it's going to be a really different feeling than if you're doing this as a full-time living. So 10 years in, I'm a little more ruthless about what I'm going to charge and what I'm willing to do. And I didn't have that much ruth before when I first started out. But if I had to answer the question, how much do you charge on the spot? I'm going to show you the holistic pricing rubric. I always forget I have this. It's amazing. Oh, and you all will really appreciate it because you get rubrics. Teachers are the only people who get rubrics. So this is the holistic pricing rubric, and there's the link for that. You can download it and check it out and stuff. And this is how I've come to think about pricing and writing. You'll see there's 3 layers. There's the beginner across the bottom, intermediate across the middle, and advanced across the top. And this really came about because I would have people come to me who are just truly excellent writers, like masters of the craft. They're doing great. But their freelance experience when it comes to processes, marketing, and an outcome were more on the low side. So it felt so wrong to tell someone who's an excellent writer they can only charge $20 an hour. But I think it's because there are these different factors to the writing. So your writing skill is important. If you're starting out as a beginner, you've got these basic skills. Maybe you've received compliments before and you just feel really good when you're writing. Once you start to get a hang of things, you're more like a wordsmith. There's room to grow, but it's definitely your thing. And you've had good experiences writing. And then true craft, you just really nail it on the first try most of the time. But when it comes to your processes, when it comes to what it's like to work with you, what it's like to have a project with you, do you show up to the call, that kind of stuff. If you're flying by the seat of your pants, you're willing to give it your best shot, but you're making it up as you go, yeah, that's going to fall into that beginner category. But you can ramp up and put processes into place, create this amazing client experience. We have a pre-webinar on that next week for client experience. Until you're giving, I'm an excellent writer and working with me is excellent. And then we're starting to push our pricing up. Over here on niche and marketing experience, I do think niche is really important in B2B because it means walking into that conversation and not having to explain what the payer and the pay provider is. It allows someone to start at a much higher level with you and not have to do all this work and maybe do more editing on the other end. So if you come in and it's fairly general, If it doesn't matter who or what you're writing about, I would put you in the beginner category, if your background doesn't factor much into it. If you start to be aware of those core concepts, like I would say all of you are at least intermediate, if not advanced, in educational technology, because like you have this lived experience of how classrooms operate and how teachers use the products that you'd be writing about. So that's a win right there. And then deeply niched, you have specific experience and background knowledge and expertise or function. And that's the kind of thing where if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I'm going to say that I do this for higher ed, marketing, and HR. I don't have, I'm very clear, I don't have actual like on the ground work experience in there, but I've been writing in those niches for 5 years. So I'm just so well read about those topics that it doesn't take me much to get up to speed on it. So that's why I'd be up there. And then for outcome guarantee and lack of risk, this is from that client's perspective of if I hire you, like how much of a risk am I taking? If you have no examples, you have all the signs of a potential, but you haven't actually done it yet, that you're going to fall in that beginner category. Once you have some examples, once you have some testimonials of people saying, I gave them an assignment and it went great, you start to move up that ladder. And then people in conversion rate optimization, they can have really clear examples and like basically case studies of they worked with me and their sales went up. It's very hard to do, but the people who have that end up charging a lot more. And just a nuance of this, I don't actually recommend hourly billing, but I've included hourly rates because I think that's a nice universal way to talk about it. I see this more as like my internal rate. So I'm never going to charge a project. Ooh, I'm not going to walk in and say, you're paying me $500 an hour to do this, but I might charge $3,000 for a white paper that only takes me 6 hours. And then that's going to be like a $300 hourly rate. Or I don't know math, but whatever that ends up with. That's why we're moving from an hourly rate when we get started into a project rate or a value-based pricing rate. But again, I don't want to get too overwhelming because it can be frustrating to think about that stuff. If we're trying to find our first client and just get our LinkedIn up, we don't need to worry about what it takes to bill $500 an hour. That's a later problem. And I think about that a lot with parenting, really, because when I had one kid, when you have 0 kids, the idea of one kid is like astounding. The idea of 5 kids is like earth shattering. You don't know how that happens. But when you have one kid, you start to understand, how you go from 1 to 2 kids and then 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, whatever your family looks like. I think that's a lot what it's like for starting anything new, because we just don't know until we've taken that first step, and then you can make more decisions about it. So in general, many people come into freelancing at the beginner state. They might have a blip up with the word skill. They might have a blip up with the marketing niche, having a background or a master's in education. And then that can pull you up into $60, $75, $90 an hour. And then as you learn about project pricing, you can more comfortably estimate it. But yeah, if you don't feel like you can walk in and just say, pay me $2,000 for a white paper, you are very normal. That's not something many people feel comfortable doing. That's not expected. But I will say, I was on a call yesterday and it came up that it actually was valuable for me to know what Bloom's taxonomy was. As having a master's in nurse and teaching, the expert was like, do you know what that is? And I was able to say, yes, I know what that is. And so we talked about it for a little bit. So it seems like what we know isn't that relevant, but it really is, especially as people apply teaching and learning best practices to the business world. It's just amazing the things that are coming out. And that's just the message of hope, because businesses will always need writers and there will always be new businesses. Like the whole point of technology is that we are finding new frontiers and doing new things with it all the time. So even if one hack you can do is to look at press releases, there's a lot of different ways to look out for clients. But if you look at latest business technology news and press releases, and then just find these companies that are growing and expanding, like I could go find Advata and email them and say, hey, do you need a writer? Congratulations on your funding round. Like that kind of thing, if you're looking for clients. And some of this won't be pertinent, but some of it could be interesting. Yeah. Perfect. So we got a nice little opening for any FAQs. So if any silly questions that you should totally already know come up, please feel free to write them. So where do you find clients? I'm trying to ruminate on what could be even more helpful about that. The anonymous otter. Peter asks, which industries or niches are good targets for a teacher moving into writing? Totally. Like I said, I really like higher ed and K through 12 dive. Let's go back to dive. because even just by going to school, like whatever kind of school you might have gone to for teaching accreditation, that gives you a sense of what's happening in the environment and how you might be helped, like how you might be able to help. So something like 66% of adults say college doesn't meet the needs of today's students. That's more like reporting, but let's find one that's more B2B-ish. Boom. This is interesting. This is, if it's interesting to you, it's interesting. But what we have is a global payments company writing in the higher education space. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what and why and how? But apparently, higher education is heeding the call of a new generation of students that expects universal access. So that would be a word I Googled to figure out what's going on across on-campus and online experiences, from mobile IDs to virtual attendance check-ins and order ahead meals, blah, blah, blah. TouchNet is a premier provider of integrated, comprehensive, and secure commerce. So just seeing this tells us a couple things. We know TouchNet is advertising, right? They have this, like they made this, so they're active with content marketing. We know they want to reach the higher education audience. And so we can go to their website, Simplifying the Business of Higher Education. Let's go to their blog. We can see their blog's pretty active. And so this would be a great company. And check this out. So this is, you shouldn't need to know this, but 3 big advantages of hosted, blah, 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 5 innovative ways, 5 creative ways. This tells me they need a writer because they're using really formulaic headlines and they're probably going with like SEO focused kind of stuff. So I would be going on LinkedIn to find TouchNet people. And why don't I do that right now? Because now it's kind of like we know we've got a live one. So I'm going to look at the company and then I'm going to look at the people at the company. And then I'm going to search marketing. It's magnificent. So there's 61 people. How do I see them? It's got to be a way to see the people. Maybe I just do TouchNet and look at people. Nice. So I see the vice president of marketing, strategic marketing professional. So if I was really going after this as a lead, I might connect with this person and say, hey, I write in the B2B space. I saw your recent white paper on higher ed. I'd love to connect. And then based on my LinkedIn and profession right now, they might reach out and ask if I'm taking new clients. But just knowing what their company is and just knowing that you read their white paper, that's enough for them to be interested in getting to know you. Creative marketing manager, digital communication specialist. So I'd pick 3 or 4 of these folks and connect with them personally. But that could be that path to doing this. Let me see what other industries or niches. Excuse me. So higher ed dive and K through 12 dive are really more directly obvious connections. So let's look at the other ones. So most of them, I would just kind of go with, do you have an interest in them? Do you care about banking and payments? Do you care about finance or construction? Food could be interesting because we all eat food and we might have an interest in where our ingredients come from or how they're manufactured. And I recently wrote for what's basically Big Flour. So the companies that provide like all of the raw flour that we use and stuff is really interesting. But you can see this is reporting on new foods. But check this out. Okay, here is the link. Bob's Red Mill to halt D2C operations. If we know what Bob's Red Mill is, that's just a product, but then we don't know what DTC is. So we can look up DTC. And we know it's a marketing term. Direct to consumer marketing. Interesting. So that's the thing where a company will just sell you stuff directly off of their website. And so this is this whole report on how Bob's Red Mill is not going to do that anymore and why. And so that's where it goes from food to business to marketing and why we're reporting on this. So it's kind of like, why would this flour company stop selling on the website? They're only selling through retailers. I don't know. So in this situation, it's not that Bob's Red Mill would hire you and you would write about this. It's that companies in the D2C space would hire you. So wholesale distribution, BMO capital markets. Interesting. So PepsiCo, Nestle, Unilever, Bob's Red Mill, those are people who would hire B2C brands, B2C writers, and have you write an ad for almond flour, that kind of thing. But the company that they used, let's say Fi or Big Commerce, whatever they were using on their website, those are the people who would be writing to you about. You would be writing about it, B2B. Most consumers don't understand what carbon neutral means. Interesting. Yeah, so you kind of literally set a timer, 15 minutes, and just follow your interests in something. because everything that you're reading is helping you create like a language of marketing in your. And Peter, I would say HR. I just found that really interesting because in my transition out of teaching, I was obsessed with what would make someone hire someone, especially if they had a background in teaching. So I learned about hiring and compensation and benefits and interesting things like that. Nice. Cool. These are killer questions. So someone asks, a freelancer friend recommended starting a blog as I get started to have some beginning writing samples. Do you think this could be helpful, or would there be a better use of my time? My answer is no. It's fun when you are allowed to have an opinion and you probably won't get in trouble. I would say there's definitely a better use of your time because the reason people use a blog is very different based on who you are. So a company is going to use a blog to get website traffic and convert sales. So if I'm selling a book, I'm going to write blogs to drive people to my book so they buy my book. If you're writing a blog as a freelancer, no one is Googling the things you would write about to hire a freelancer. They're just looking for a freelancer. They're looking for another business. They're going to look on LinkedIn. They're going to try to ask their network for recommendations. They're going to look at the places where they already read stuff and see if there's any people posting there. So if you are truly just looking for practice, feel free to do whatever you want with a blog. That's wonderful. But as a lead generation tool or as a way to prove to a B2B company that you could write for them, it's not going to be that helpful because if anything, they're going to come to your blog and see that you're writing B2C content and they'll just dismiss it as, oh, that's not someone who's for me. So it's almost like the kernel of the idea is there. Definitely start writing some samples. And the foundations class kind of has some templates for that. Let me show you what's in there. Cool. So this is the free foundations class that kind of shows you just what B2B is and those basics. This will talk about what a blog article is. And I do think that's enough information. If you read a couple blogs and then read through this, I think you would be able to try your hand at one. And it has the introduction in there. The outline in there that would show you the different parts of it. So I would say samples are important, but to have a blog about freelancing or about yourself or about, I guess, what we typically think of as a blog, like a lifestyle blog, I don't think that would be helpful. I think that would be distracting from the work they want to see. And let me show you mine. It's a little different because I'm trying to position away from writing and more into strategy, even though I'm doing a lot of writing. But when someone's coming to a website to see if they should hire you, it's more about, am I looking at a real person? Are they speaking in a language that tells me they can actually help me do what I want to do? And then when I look at their portfolio, am I going to see what I want to see? And so this is mine, the thing that clients would come and see. So if they want to see articles in HR, they're going to see some clips from places I've written. But you can see I don't have a blog on here because that's not going to be how I get freelance clients. But I do have a blog for the B2B Writing Institute because that is how I get new students. So that might be an interesting nuance. So for the freelance side of my writing, I don't have a blog. I'm not going to get people through search traffic. It's all referral, all LinkedIn, and all me prospecting. But for the B2B Writing Institute, I do think writers search for things before they figure out how to do more stuff. And then I get them to subscribe here. So that's the difference in the business model that you have is what would make that distinction to me. But also do whatever you want. Just my opinion. And what could be going on there, I guess it would depend on if they're a freelance writer and if they're in the B2C space, because in B2C, it might be more important to see an example of somebody's personality or different things going on. But if we're saying, I'm going to write a blog about my experience of walking my dog the other day, I don't think that would be helpful. I don't have a dog. If I did. Yeah, and the B2B Writing Institute blog, it is pretty darn good. So you'll see some research that we did last year, some of the podcast stuff. We've had that put into blog posts so you can listen or read. Getting busy over here. Cool. We have covered some serious ground today. So I'm just really grateful that you guys showed up and spent a Thursday afternoon with me. Like, this is real time and I appreciate it. Cool. One more question coming in from Peter. Bring it on. Peter says, most of my clients have come from connecting on LinkedIn. Do LinkedIn. Don't wait. Yeah. And I love that And I want to emphasize, do LinkedIn the way you want to do LinkedIn. So doing LinkedIn does not have to mean you wake up and take a selfie and then put up a picture of your oatmeal and talk about your influence, like the ways we might see other people doing. Like LinkedIn, doing it as a writer, to me really means here's an interesting thing about my writing process. I like to start with the conclusion and then I write the introduction. Like something as simple as that just shows insight into you being a writer and thinking about the writing process and thinking about how you're helping clients. Anytime you read an article that we just talked about on Industry Dive, make a post about it and say, I just read this article. It's interesting to me that Bob's Red Mill is moving out of D2C, and then post it with the link. And something as simple as that just shows your interest in the space. So it's not about building a personality unless you want to. It's more about just being active as a human being who's available to be hired for writing. And I think that really is a secret, special thing. And Peter says, I hardly ever post anything until recently. Totally. Yeah, because it's more, I think the reason I picked LinkedIn as my main social thing is because real people are there thinking about work and business. So the people who are spending time on LinkedIn, they're just more open to hiring people, to meeting people, to seeing if you could help each other out. Definitely keep your boundaries up and don't agree to get on any calls with anybody unless there's a reason or like you have a really good feeling about it. Because there are people who are out there just to get on calls and then try to sell you something. But in general, I also have had a really good experience with LinkedIn. Thank you, Peter. Cool. That is going to be all for this afternoon. If you have more questions, you're going to get an email when the replay is ready. You just hit reply to that or really to any email that I've sent you, and it'll get to my inbox and we can keep talking. But thank you for checking it out. And I know it can be intimidating to step up to the internet and just give me money. But fortunately, that's not actually what we're doing. This is a really established field, and there are a lot of people and resources that are here to help you make it work. So I'm excited for you to take the first step. Stop the share. All right. Well, you guys have a great week, and I'll see you in your inbox with the replay pretty soon.